Secrets of the Seekers. He couldn't move. His arms, legs, abdomen, and neck were tied to what seemed to be a large metallic chair. The air was rank and heavy. His lungs were struggling to breathe, his eyes wide shut, hoping that this is some weird nightmare. He dared not witness the horrifying reality that surrounded him. Fear and desperation overtook his mind, and realizing that he's not dreaming, he opened his eyes and scanned his surroundings. The man's stomach churned. The sense of dread he felt at that moment could drive any lesser man to insanity. But he managed, barely, to keep his wits about him. His name was 𝓐𝓾𝓽𝓱𝓸𝓻, a 32-year-old psychology professor from Brussels, Belgium. Captivated by the way people think since he first discovered Russian literature, he pursued his dream to become a psychologist until he got the offer to be a lecturer in a renowned university. He disliked teaching, but the pay was pretty good, so he stuck with it. Eyes wide shut again, his mind was terribly clouded. Struggling to remember who he is and how he got to this unimaginable place.
Think, damn you! Focus!
He thought to himself. Being so close to loss of sanity, Christopher kept his mind focused on recalling what brought him in this terrible situation. It was a cold night in October. Julie, Christopher's wife, asked him to go to the store and buy candy and sweets, for it was the night before Halloween. Having been a big fan of that holiday in his childhood, her husband set out to the supermarket to buy some treats for the kids. The lecturer's last memory was looking at some chocolate bars when his body just went numb, and he fainted. And it was so strange, because the man could feel himself fainting. He felt how he slipped away. Far from that little supermarket down the street where he lived, Christopher was in some strange, part organic, part mechanical room. The windowless walls were made of flesh and metal. Advanced mainframes and computers were mixed in with pulsing organic mass. Worst thing was, he wasn't alone in that large yet claustrophobic room. They had humanoid forms, and yet they were so different. Their skin and flesh were transparent, like a jellyfish. They had no bones, except for a thin spine on their backs. The organs and the few white blood vessels could be easily seen through their layer of near-invisible skin. But the most striking part of their body was their brains. Their immense brains towering above the fragile-looking body. Pink, glowing faintly and connected to every other organ, with a series of tiny neural vessels. Their faces, if it could be called that, had little distanced eyes, almost like dots, and a pale, crab-like mouth, with teeth on their thin, wide lips. They were cast into a bulky, long and metallic electronic chair, just like Christopher's, although in full control of the machines, transporting themselves around, connecting their bodies to mainframes via small, organic wires growing out of their bellies, digesting the received data and moving on to the next terminal. The room hosted 4 of them, but only 3 seemed to work. The other was facing the man, staring at him in a curious manner. Chris was deathly frightened of the alien-looking creature, trying to avoid its gaze by focusing on the other horrors surrounding him. Around the walls, floor, and ceiling, millions of minuscule cables and veins were scattered. Grotesque organ-like objects were pulsing in computers and the other devices. And the chair-locked creatures were moving erratically from monitor to monitor, connecting to each with cables ejected from the chair. The staring one moved closer to him, much to the captured professor's terror. A small orifice opened from the creature's chair, revealing a white and brown ringed worm, making its way out of that hole, slowly crawling on the floor towards the human. It climbed into Christopher's body, eventually reaching his neck. A sudden electric jolt from the back of his neck made him open his mouth wide and paralyzed it, allowing the worm to crawl inside it. It didn't stop. It made its way up, inside the lecturer's head, in the inside of his nose, and then even higher. He eventually felt the worm burrowing into his brain, a sensation that did not cause the man any pain, yet it felt so horrible and wrong. A strange feeling overtook his body as the worm dissolved into a cold, thin fluid. After a rush of unusual, intense euphoria, Christopher fainted again, and he dreamt. He dreamt about unimaginable shapes, unknown colors, dark lights and bright shadows, infinite darkness and solid light, indescribable horrors, and Empyrean wonders. Time, space, and reality were distorted as the dream changed the structure of his brain. Concepts forever unknown to mankind showed themselves to him, twisting and bending his simple human imagination to the extreme, giving Chris the power to grasp these otherworldly things. He woke up. As soon as he woke up, happiness and euphoria flooded his vastly expanded mind. While unaware of the current situation, the man wasn't worried, even though that felt wrong. Something seemed to block that feeling, leaving him dizzy with pleasure and bliss. Still in the same room, still being stared at by the overly curious creature, he couldn't do much else than stare back, until the alien-looking entity moved its mouth. No sound came out of those crab-like lips. Instead, a continuous barrage of thoughts, of concepts that made no sense to him, and yet felt connected to each other, assaulted Christopher's brain, as in some sort of mental communication. The alien being seemed to take notice of the human's reaction to its peculiar way of conversation, and transported itself to a biomechanical terminal, where the entity shot several of its veins into a socket next to the computer's monitor. Nothing seemed to happen. It pulled its veins back and returned to its initial position. The poor man tried to make sense of all of this, but his mind was numbed by that bizarre sense of satisfaction, making thinking of anything more complex than a square a struggle. How he wished he could block that feeling of happiness from his brain. It was maddening, having his thoughts overtaken by worthless ecstasy. To make things worse, his mind was bombarded by another train of alien thoughts, although not from the creature standing in front of him, but from one of its colleagues, who just transported itself into the room. It was so terribly strange, being able to pinpoint where these thoughts came from, but stranger was the fact that the thoughts actually made some sort of sense. The aliens sent thoughts to each other, and those thoughts were concepts of the things they tried to say. His understanding of this uncanny form of communication could only be attributed to the peculiar, parasitic worm nested in his brain. Judging from what the aliens said, the formation of some sort of key was delayed. The other alien left the room, leaving Christopher with the other interlocular form in front of him, staring continuously.
I just want to be back home. Please don't hurt me.
Chris tried to say, but instead of talking with his voice, he projected somehow the idea and the concepts of that sentence in the brain of that alien organism. He could feel a communication channel between the two of them, a thought relay. The creature seemed very surprised to hear that. Almost hurriedly, the being guided one of its veins into Christopher's half-mechanic, half-organic seat, burying itself into one of the chair's jacks. That sent a jolt of electricity up the man's spine, and while it did hurt quite a bit, it also removed the maddening euphoria clouding his brain, allowing him to think freely.
Do you understand me?
The alien communicated, pouring a stream of thoughts into Christopher's mind.
Yes.
Chris replied. He expected to be asked another question, but the alien stood still and silent. Trying his luck, the man asked,
Where am I?
The tester ship. Currently floating in space, measured in your standard distance measuring unit, 3,000 kilometers away from Earth.
The thought of being 3,000 kilometers away from his planet terrified the already scared lecturer, making him shudder, as much as the metallic hinges allowed him to.
Why was I brought here?
The creature looked at the little professor as if his question made no sense.
To be tested.
What for?
Answering that would require explaining.
The creature made a pause.
I will explain. Your key has been delayed, so there is enough time to describe the seeking process, if I am listened to.
Hesitating, Christopher finally said,
I will listen.
I will begin. I am part of a grand species which calls ourselves Seekers. Our purpose in this life is to reach absolute knowledge, to unlock every mystery of the universe. Omniscience. Your race, the most intelligent race on this planet, has manifested similar wishes, but your methods are on an exponentially smaller scale. Knowledge for humans is merely a collection of truths. For us, bearers of far greater intelligence, a whole dimension that we can reach and harvest truths from, as we are merely physical beings. We cannot enter that realm. The closest we can get is the way, an infinite labyrinth in which that dimension leaks wisdom. Our task is to travel the labyrinth, harvest brilliance, and store it into the universal mind, a collective databank which every seeker can access. Once omniscience is achieved, our species can ascend into a higher plane of existence, abandoning this puny physical form. As to what you are tested for, it will be verified whether your species is fit to ascend to being a seeker. You have been chosen as a random, average individual of your species to be tried. Should the test be positive, the mother will transport itself here and absorb, and, afterwards, alter the human inhabitants of this planet.
And it stopped. All this was too much for a 32-year-old lecturer to comprehend. After a period of intense brainstorming, he came up with this single question.
And if I do not pass the test?
Your race will be obliterated, since you would have no part to play in our grand plan. We will send drones into your planet's atmosphere and raise the quantity of oxygen. Nothing would survive.
The answer came fast, leaving the poor man in absolute despair. If he has been terrified since he woke up in this outlandish place, now, knowing that the extinction, in one way or another, of his whole race was at stake, shattered his wits, a sense of impending doom overtaking his whole body. All his friends, family, pupils, every person met and every person he didn't meet, were about to be destroyed or turned into slaves.
It might not happen. You show signs of above average intelligence, and your brain accepted the neural worm with relative ease. Your key will be ready soon, and we shall find out the truth.
The alien stopped. One of his colleagues entered the room and communicated with him. Christopher could only understand parts of the dialogue, since those thoughts weren't directed to him. The key was ready. That's what he understood, and that information horrified the professor. Both creatures turned to him. His interlocutor announced,
"It is time."
And he shot one of his chair's wires into the man's own. He instantly felt dizzy and numb, and the wire retracted. His chair moved by itself out of the main room, taking him into another, fully organic one, as if it was inside some sort of creature. A small chamber with red, meaty walls and no lights. As the door behind him closed, he felt those walls surrounding him, growing, eventually completely covering Christopher's body. Even though he was anesthetized, he felt his hand being cut off by what seemed to be a million little teeth. Replacing his hand was a metallic-feeling object thrusted deeply inside the remains of his arm, leaving a bit outside. The key welded itself into his hand, and after it connected to the brain, he could feel as if the strange object searched all the contents of his mind. Chris fainted.
I'm sorry, ma'am. We still haven't found any trace of him. No witnesses, no clues, nothing. Except for some crazy talk.
The officer said. What do you mean by crazy talk?
A nutjob told us that he saw your husband vanish out of thin air. Disappear. It was probably some junkie trying to screw with us. He certainly looked the part, but you shouldn't let this trouble your mind. In fact, you should go get some sleep. Being up all night searching for Christopher and all. Just leave it to us and get some rest. Good day.
And the officer left. Sleep. Yeah, that'd be nice. She felt so tired, but the thought of her husband being in danger wouldn't let 𝓤𝓾𝓽𝓲𝓬 rest. Christopher had got to be somewhere. It's just that she didn't know where to look. Up? She looked up, for some odd reason. Blue sky stretching out for miles, its center decorated with one bright burning dot. Something was peculiar, though. There was another dot, but black, growing bigger and bigger. And that was not the only strange thing. People all around them turned into streams of light and flew rapidly to the little black dot. She screamed her husband's name as she was teleported to the mother, and Christopher was not there. No. He was in the labyrinth, traveling at mind-numbing speeds between claustrophobic walls of flesh and biological matter, hunting for cracks into the dimension of knowledge, ingesting the seeping wisdom and returning his findings to the universal mind. Forever. His body was changed after receiving the key, turning him into a seeker, driven by the electric chair, doomed to spend an eternity wandering an infinite labyrinth, slave to his new brethren's thirst for brilliance. What his brethren didn't know is that unlike any other race they have met in this universe, the human brain does not adapt completely to the key. In other species, if the key is accepted, the brain is rewritten completely and emptied, the computerized chair acting as a secondary brain and performing all the tasks required to harvesting wisdom. It fails to do so on human brains, leaving it intact, allowing the human to think, see, and feel. Some humans, because of partial incompatibilities with the key, retain their mouth and their voice, and their screams echo through the hallways of the labyrinth for eternity. Hello everybody, thank you so much for listening. I want to give a special thank you to the voice actors who helped me bring this narration to life, and you can check out their links below in the description and the pinned comment. Subscribe for more stories like this, and I'll see you next time.